Title: The Tribune's Chaos. He was a soldier of Rome. She was the only battle he couldn't win. Chapter 1: The Merchant's Daughter. The scent of roasting lamb and cheap wine drifted from the taverna, a familiar, greasy perfume of the Subura. Inside, the air was thick with the clamor of dice and the coarse laughter of off-duty legionaries. Livia, however, was not laughing. She was tucked in a corner, her stylus scratching against a wax tablet, trying to balance the books for her father's wool shop. The numbers swam before her eyes, shipments of Gallic linen, debts owed to the dyers, the exorbitant rent her father paid to their slumlord. It was tedious, necessary work, and it kept her from the marriage her mother so desperately pushed. At 22, Livia was considered a spinster. She didn't mind. Spinsters, she reasoned, had the freedom to think. A shadow fell over her work. She looked up, expecting a customer, and her breath hitched. He was tall, with the sun-bronzed skin of a man who spent his days outdoors, and a soldier's disciplined stillness. But his eyes were the color of the stormy sea, and they held a weary amusement that was entirely his own. A fine cloak of deep blue, the paludamentum of a tribune, was flung over one shoulder. He was clearly a man of rank, miles from the dingy taverna he had chosen. "You are the merchant's daughter, are you not?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "The one who has the most organized accounts in the Subura." Livia's heart hammered against her ribs. Men like him didn't speak to women like her, not unless they wanted something. She forced herself to meet his gaze. "I am," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "And you are a tribune who has lost his way." He chuckled, a warm, rich sound that cut through the taverna's noise. "Not lost. I have been sent here to find a scribe for the garrison. I was told you were the best. My name is Marcus." He extended a hand, and she noticed the calluses on his palm, the faint silver of a scar running along his thumb. A soldier's hand. A killer's hand. And yet, when she placed her own in it, his grip was gentle. "I have a problem," he said, releasing her. "A shipment of grain from Ostia. The quartermaster's records are a disaster. I need someone who can untangle the mess." The pay he offered was more than her father's shop made in a month. The work, however, would mean spending many hours with him. Livia, pragmatic to her core, agreed. She did not yet know she had just signed a contract with fate. Chapter 2: The Chaos Within. They worked side by side in the cramped garrison office. The silence was filled with the scratch of stylus on wax and the rustle of papyrus. Marcus would watch her, his gaze thoughtful, as she deftly navigated the columns of numbers, her brow furrowed in concentration. He found her competence intoxicating. He had seen too many women who smiled and simpered, who traded their beauty for a golden bracelet and a powerful husband. Livia was different. She met his gaze directly, challenged his assumptions, and refused to be charmed by his rank. One evening, as the sun bled crimson over the Palatine Hill, they finished the last scroll. The accounts were balanced perfectly. The grain was accounted for. The quartermaster was exposed as a fraud. "You are a wonder," Marcus said, leaning back in his chair. "I believe you could solve all the empire's problems with that stylus of yours." "Only the financial ones," she replied, a rare smile gracing her lips. "The political ones are beyond even me." He stood and moved closer to her, his presence filling the small room. The air between them crackled with unspoken words. He gently took her hand, his thumb stroking her calloused fingers. "And what about the problems of the heart? Can you balance those?" Her breath caught. "Those are not problems, Marcus. They are chaos." "Good," he murmured, his voice husky. "Because I have felt nothing but chaos since the moment I saw you in that taverna, surrounded by drunkards, far too clever for the lot of them." He leaned in, and his kiss was a surprise, tender, not demanding. It tasted of hope and the fading Roman sun. It was the first time a man had ever treated her as an equal, not a convenience. Not a possession. A partner. When she finally pulled back, her cheeks flushed, she whispered, "What are we doing?" "I have no idea," he admitted, a boyish grin spreading across his scarred face. "But I don't want to stop." Neither did she. Chapter 3, Stolen Hours. Weeks turned into months. They met in secret, not from shame, but for the sheer pleasure of a stolen moment. He would take her to the quiet gardens of the Celestian, away from the throng, where he'd recite lines from Ovid and she'd tease him for his overly dramatic delivery. "You are worse than a traveling actor," she laughed, sitting on a marble bench as he paced before her, gesturing wildly. "Ovid is a genius," he protested. "Let her not be swayed by gifts, but by character, that is you, Livia. You cannot be bought." "I can be bought," she countered, her eyes glinting. "By good wool and fair prices." He groaned, dropping onto the bench beside her. "You are impossible. And yet, here you are." He gifted her a small, elegant gold fibula, a simple brooch to fasten her pallor. "A token," he said, his voice suddenly serious. "So you will not forget me, even when I am far." She looked at the intricate design, a tiny eagle, its wings spread in flight. "Where would you go?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The campaign season was approaching. Germania called. And Rome had no mercy for soldiers who lingered. That night, as he walked her back to the Subura, the streets were quiet. He stopped at the door of her father's shop, his hand resting on the rough wood. "Livia," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I am leaving in a week." She felt the world tilt beneath her feet. She had known, of course. She had simply refused to believe it. "Then we have a week," she said, her voice steady despite the tears pricking her eyes. "I will write," he promised. "Every day. I will send word by every merchant, every courier, every pigeon if I must." She laughed, a wet, broken sound. "Pigeons?" "Desperate times," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. He kissed her forehead, a benediction, and disappeared into the night. Chapter 4, The Weight of a Ring. The night before he was to leave, he met her in their garden. The moon was a silver sickle, casting long, mournful shadows. The flowers that had once seemed so vibrant now drooped, as if they too mourned his departure. "I cannot go," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not without you. Not without the promise of you. Marcus, you must. Your duty." "I know my duty," he said, taking her hands in his. "But my heart has only one. Marry me, Livia. Not here, in this clamoring city. But when I return. I will petition the emperor if I must. I will fight every barbarian from here to the Rhine to come back to you." Livia looked at him, this proud soldier, his heart laid bare before her. In a world where women were traded like currency, he was offering her the wealth of his soul. He was asking her to be a partner, not a possession. "Yes," she whispered, her fear melting into a fierce joy. "I will wait. For 1,000 years, if I must. I will wait for the chaos to return." He kissed her then, a kiss of fierce promise. He placed his legionary's eagle ring on her finger. It was heavy, crude, a soldier's ring of iron and bronze. But to her, it was worth more than all the gold in the imperial treasury. "A token," he said, echoing his earlier words. "So you will not forget." "I could never forget," she said, tears glistening in her eyes, though she refused to let them fall. He left at dawn. She watched him march down the Via Flaminia, his blue cloak billowing behind him, until he was nothing but a speck against the horizon. Chapter 5, 1,000 Years. The next year was a blur of worry. Livia consulted the military dispatches that were posted in the forum, her heart in her throat with every name she read. She prayed to every god she knew, Jupiter, Mars, even the foreign ones her Greek neighbor whispered about. She wore his ring on a leather cord around her neck, beneath her tunic, where no one could see. She took on more work, burying herself in accounts and ledgers. She became the most sought-after scribe in the Subura. But every night, she lay in her small room, the fibula at her throat, and she counted the days. The reports from Germania were grim. Ambushes. Betrayals. The loss of 3 legions in the Teutoburg forest. Livia wept for the families, even as she searched desperately for Marcus's name among the survivors. She heard nothing. No letter. No merchant with a message. No pigeon. And still, she waited. A year and a day after he left, Livia was in the wool shop, the ring heavy against her chest. A merchant from Gaul was haggling over the price of purple dye when the door burst open. He was thinner, his face bearing a new scar above his brow, his eyes holding the dark knowledge of war. His blue cloak was tattered, his armor dented. But he was there. He was alive. And he was looking at her, as if she were the only woman in the empire. The merchant's protest died in his throat. Marcus strode across the shop, the crowd parting for him. He didn't speak. He just pulled Livia into his arms, burying his face in her hair, breathing her in. 1,000 years, he murmured into her ear. It felt like 1,000 years. Livia laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief, and clung to him. The accounts of the wool shop could wait. The chaos of love had returned, and it was, she decided, the only order she would ever need. He pulled back, his stormy eyes searching her face. I wrote, he said, his voice cracking. Every week. I sent letters. Did you not? They never came, she whispered. I thought you were dead. I thought you had forgotten me, he admitted, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized she'd shed. But here you are. Still wearing my ring. I told you, she said, her smile trembling. I would wait 1,000 years. He kissed her then, in front of the merchant, the customers, the entire Subura. And for the first time in a year, Livia felt whole. Epilogue, the Order of Chaos. They were married 3 days later in a small ceremony in the gardens of the Celestian. Marcus had petitioned the emperor, as promised, and his request had been granted, a rare honor for a tribune who had survived the Germanic front. Livia wore a simple gown of white wool, fastened with the gold fibula he had given her. His ring, the iron eagle, now rested on her finger, no longer hidden. Marcus, clean-shaven and resplendent in a new tunic, looked at her as if she were a goddess. I thought about you every night, he said, his voice low as they stood before the altar. In the mud. In the rain. In the blood. You were my reason. Then you came back, she said, her eyes bright. And now you are my chaos. He laughed, pulling her close. Always. And as the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Livia realized that life was not about balance. It was not about tidy accounts and predictable sums. It was about the wild, untamable chaos of love, and she would choose it, every single time.